Over to you, Alun.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you for having me, Eleanor, and the rest of the TALMO group. Let me just share my slides with you first of all, make sure that's all working correctly. Nearly there, I think. So hopefully we can see full screen slides. Is that correct, Eleanor?
Yes, it is, we can.
Perfect. Okay, right. So let me first of all introduce myself. So my name's Alun Owen. I'm currently head of the Stats Support Service at Coventry University. And I'm co-presenting today with Ellen Marshall, who's from Sheffield Hallam University. Helen, please feel free to come in and just say hello if you're on camera. I don't know, I'm not seeing you, but
hi everyone. Yeah, I don't know whether you can see me or not, but hi.
And yeah, we said we would talk today a little bit about the about statistics support, which for some people in this audience, we're not sure exactly how much people know about statistics support. So part of what we're going to talk about is to explain what it is. So we'll talk a little bit about what the past is with regard to statistics support and how we've arrived at this particular point in time and what currently happens with regard to statistics support. And then we'll look at what might happen, or we'll try and look into our crystal ball for what might happen in the future with statistics support, because as certainly as Eleanor mentioned earlier on, she mentioned curriculum modernisation in statistics, and I think that's a particular key theme that we're going to touch on later on. One of the things that we also will talk about in the present is the emergence of online learning, and Rachel earlier on mentions or use the phrase moving away from online learning. And I think in statistics support, I think the picture's slightly different. So it'd be quite interesting, and we hope to compare and contrast the difference between online statistics support and online statistics learning and teaching. Okay, so part one then is the past. So first of all, I thought I'd start with reflecting on what is statistics support. Now, maths support has been around for a lot longer. Probably mathematics support has been around for a good 30 years in some institutions. I can't speak for every institution, but I certainly know at Coventry, for example, they've been doing it since the mid-1990s. And in fact, I think it's this year that we're celebrating 30 years of maths and stats support at Coventry. But there's a definition there at the top, which was penned by Duncan Lawson and others in a paper that they published in 2003. And the point is there's three key themes there that they point out. And that one is, the first theme is that it's offered. So it's something that's offered to students. It's not compulsory, so it's optional. Not necessarily of mathematics. So to students, not necessarily of maths, it could be students that are not studying maths degrees. So typically that would have been engineers, for example. And it's in addition to their normal course of study. Now, I don't think anyone's ever really tried to sort of pencil in or pen in a specific definition of statistics support. So this is my offering, which is basically the same, but I think the key difference here is who the students are. And the point is, it's usually not of maths or stats. So whilst the maths support is for students not necessarily of maths, because mathematics students are a user of maths support, it's very unusual really for statistics students and maths students to seek out statistics support. Some do, but not many. So it's usually students that are not specialists in maths or stats. So it's usually that wide range of other disciplines from which students are seeking support. But again, it's optional and it's in addition to what they're normally given as their course of study. And one of the key sort of components of this is supporting students with perhaps their final year undergraduate projects that might involve some statistical analysis, or it might be master's students and even PhD students at some universities that get supported as well. But the key point, if I bring up the next slide, is that it's very rarely about the mathematics. So if a student's coming in wanting help with linear regression, for example, the last thing you want to do is to start trying to solve the normal equations and do any differentiation or anything like that, or use any matrix algebra. That's absolutely not what they want. What they want is this list of things which I've got down in the second point. It's all about deciding that choice of method. How do I decide what test to use? And Ellen's going to mention something about that later on. How do you use the software? At Coventry, for example, it's typically SPSS, and R more so these days. R and R Studio are emerging as much more common, more commonly used these days. But in some of the other universities, it's SAS, Minitab, and Excel, of course, as well as other software packages such as Stata. But then they want help with interpreting the output, then reporting them, and how to write those results up, how to assess assumptions, but also planning. They want help with planning a study, a survey, a questionnaire, an experiment. Some students don't want any of that. They just want help with sort of making sense of the foreign language as they see it in a journal paper that's full of statistical results. So it's helping them sort of work their way through that. So it's a much broader range of skills, if you like, that the students are looking for help with. Some are softer and some are harder. So it's very much not about the maths. I think that's the key point there. So the question is, why are we in this position where we're getting students coming to us for help with this? Well, it's probably no surprise to say that many students arrive inadequately prepared for their courses in terms of the quantitative demands of the courses. Certainly over the last 10, 20 years, there's been a big increase in courses, including the analysis of data and use of quantitative methods, research methods in their disciplines. So that's meant that these students arrive on their courses and are quite surprised when they realize they're going to have to do data handling, use statistics, and even do some significance testing or hypothesis testing. So it's sometimes a bit of a shock for them, often when they've only got a qualification up to GCSE in mathematics in the UK. Now, statistics support is often, but not always, offered as part of a university or institution's math support. So many universities now do offer math support, and the position of statistics support is much sketchier. Some universities offer it quite clearly. They've got staff that are skilled in statistics, such as at Coventry, where I am, and Sheffield Hallam, where Ellen is. But in other universities, the statistics support is being given by or provided by staff that are probably more trained in mathematics, who are doing the best that they can in helping students with statistics. So that's an ongoing issue at the moment. And that's one of the challenges that we're currently facing, trying to support our students sort of nationally as best we can. And the picture is very similar in other countries as well, through the people that we've talked to. Now, the good news is that in the UK, certainly, a lot of institutions, the documentation that they submit now to the regulatory authorities, such as the Office for Students, things like submissions to the Teaching Excellence Framework that we've got in the UK. That was an exercise in 2017, where universities were graded on a kind of a bronze, silver, and gold standard. Obviously, all universities want to be gold. And universities were making reference to the wider student support that they were providing in there. So it's brought maths and stats support a little bit more sort of open, or emerged it more on the agenda. But we've also got institutions making reference to maths and stats support in access agreements, in access and participation plans as well. And there's increasing evidence that more and more universities are making reference to their maths and stats support provision within those documents. So there's something in it now for the institutions, or at least they're recognizing that there's something in it, apart from the fact that it's needed if we're going to help our students properly. And there's also ever increasing evidence, which is no surprise, that all of this maths and stats support contributes or helps with student achievement, but also retention. There's evidence that students stay on their courses when they otherwise would have left if it wasn't for the fact that there was some maths or stats support available to them. And it's also there's evidence that students from the widening participation groups are accessing stats support more often as well. Okay, and also one thing that Ellen's going to talk about is the fact that certainly statistics support reduces anxiety and improves confidence with using statistics through some of the work that Ellen's done. But as I say, she'll be talking about that in part 2. And one of the last things I'm going to be talking about is just to explain where stat support arrived. So I'll do this rather quickly so that I don't take up too much time. it all began really with the sort of emergence of the mathematics problem, which came about from around about the 1995, mid-90s, with a document called Tackling the Mathematics Problem, that a number of learned societies put together, including the London Mathematical Society, etc., and the IMA and the Royal Stat Society. And this introduced this phrase, the maths problem, which was all about sort of recognizing a problem typically amongst engineers with having levels of mathematics skills that weren't sufficient to complete their engineering degrees. But in 2000, the Learning and Teaching Support Networks in the UK established their 24 subject centres, one of which is the Maths, Stats and OR Subject Centre, which we still have this acronym MSOR still today. But what that did, it allowed cross-subject sort of discussion to emerge. And that began to allow sort of differences to be discussed in terms of how stats is used in other subjects. And then in 2005, the Sigma Centre for Excellence was established, or Sigma Kettle, or Settle if you prefer. And that was a Centre for Excellence in Maths and Stat Support. So that was established. And it was really down at that point, it was through the pioneering work of people like Duncan Lawson and Tony Croft and our own Michael Gove, who's with us today, that's really allowed not just math support to be recognised as an important aspect of higher education, but statistics support as the years went by. And this is really where I came along, and Ellen, I think both of us joined sort of some years after 2005. And I think we've been trying to promote the advantages of stat support since then. And one of the things that we did was to sort of launch the Stats Tutor website, which is going to be getting a revamp, by the way, for anybody that looks at that. So in the next year or so, you should see a lot of improvements with Stats Tutor. Thought I'd just fly the flag for Sigma a little and just remind everyone that if you didn't know, they won quite an award, the Time to Higher Education Award for Outstanding Achievement for Student Support in 2011. So it's done some good things. And it carries on to this day through the emergence of the Sigma network, because the funding ended, but it still remains to this day through the good work of the many people that work in maths and stat support around the country and in other countries as well. And I've got a link there to the Sigma network if you're not familiar with that, but that does lots of good things in maths and stat support. And in 2015, Ellen and myself, with the help of many other colleagues in statistics support, formed our own special interest group in statistics support as opposed to statistics teaching. And one of the main things we've been doing over the years is running staff development workshops and making resources available to help improve good practice. Okay, so one more thing I'm going to talk about before I hand over to Ellen is really to explain how stat support's offered. Well, stat support is usually offered through a university's math support centre. And those centres are often called math support centres and not necessarily maths and stat support centres. So that's where you'll often find the stat support there. It's often, but not always, through a physical drop-in centre. You might have a physical space in the institution. The picture there at the top of the two is a picture of Coventry's physical Maths and Stats Support Centre. We're very lucky. We're well funded. I won't say that to our VC, but we're well funded at Coventry, so we're very lucky. It's usually one-to-one, such as in the photograph there. You can see a picture of myself posing with a student. That was a real session, by the way. It wasn't necessarily constructed there. So it's usually one-to-one, but it can include support through resource provision. It doesn't have to be in person, or it could be through workshops. It can be drop-in, where students don't have to book. That's quite common, but some institutions do also offer it on a drop-in, on an appointment basis, sorry, as well as drop-in or instead of drop-in. And obviously with the pandemic, there's been an emergence of online support, which Alan will talk about, but I think it's worth saying that some institutions had been offering online support prior to the pandemic. And of course, the Open University had been sort of doing online one-to-one support for many years prior to that. And it was certainly through the work of the Open University that I was able to kind of introduce online support at Coventry and Loughborough prior to the pandemic. So we did have some skills with doing that before we all had to move over. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, hand over to Ellen, if that's okay. Ellen, if you're ready to pick up there.
Yeah, shall I share my screen?
Oh yeah, so let me stop sharing so that Ellen's got control of where she is. So I've stopped there for you, Ellen, if you want to pick those up now. Yeah, it's all good, Ellen, thank you.
Oh, good. Okay, yes, I'm just going to talk a bit briefly about Stat Support, who uses us and stuff. So as Alan mentioned, Coventry has a large centre, multiple staff there offering drop-in appointments and workshops. Equally, where I started working at Sheffield University, we also had a huge centre, loads of hours offered each week. Now I'm at Sheffield Hallam. It's only part of my role, so we basically get about 4 to 6 hours per week is the hours that I'm allowed to deliver stat support to 35,000 students who are entitled to come and see me and staff. But one of the reasons we wanted to use this slide was for showing the range of disciplines that use stat support. So on the left, you've got a comparison of, in the blue, these are the students using, percentage of students using math support by discipline. You can see that engineering mathematics students have the highest percentage, whereas you can see for stats, it's quite equally spread out across quite a few different sort of areas. And the same with Coventry's little Wordle here. You can see that there's a large range of students using stat support. And we're noticing more and more students from disciplines that you would expect less stats from. So we're seeing an increase in the amount of disciplines using statistics in their dissertations that you perhaps wouldn't expect, with no one lecturers or supervisors who really know much about stats at all. So that's really not fun dealing with those kind of people.
Can I mention the word staff on there on that slide, Ellen? On the word cloud, if you go back to one slide.
Yeah.
Just waiting for it to catch up. Yeah, so that staff features quite a lot here. So this word cloud is from Coventry, and that's because we're getting an increasing number of staff at Coventry University coming to the Maths and Stats Support Centre to get help with delivering their courses. There are increasing numbers of staff being asked to deliver courses in statistics, quantitative methods, research methods, who feel not quite confident enough to be able to do it. So we're actually supporting them to do it. So that's more further evidence of the increased kind of proliferation of quantitative methods on various other courses as well. Thanks, Helen.
Okay. Yeah, I've also had discussions with people at my own institution about this, because there's a lot of unprepared supervisors. We were thinking of doing some short courses for supervisors who don't know much stats at all, to try and reduce the amount of bad surveys being produced, etc., and the lack of understanding. We get supervisors' views clashing with our own views quite often. The supervisor might demand that a student uses a certain technique that's totally inappropriate, etc. So don't get me started on that one. I'm not happy at the moment. Right, okay, but we do also have resources. So these are freely available to anyone. So we thought we'd share the links. So Stat Support, we do cover a huge range of different packages, software packages, from Excel up to SAS, R, SPSS and Jamovi mostly. And Coventry also has a large number of resources, and they do run workshops as well. Also a quick plug for our interactive online test chooser in case you've got students working on dissertations that want help choosing the right analysis. You go through a series of questions and then it takes you to the relevant resource. Okay, so these are freely accessible to students at any institution. So I'm going to briefly talk about stats anxiety and confidence, because this is where well, we believe anyway that stat support and math support can make a big difference to students. So in case you weren't aware of stats anxiety, it's characterized by extensive worry, intrusive thoughts, mental disorganization, tension, and physiological arousal is one person's take on it. And this can happen for stats anxiety. It's when they're collecting, analysing, interpreting data. For maths anxiety, it would be when they were doing maths. So they're all situation specific. And I'm sure if you teach stats, you've come across students who are anxious. So it's difficult to track down exact percentages of how many are anxious. So I'm going to say between 75 and 90%. The 90% is from my own data. So if you have a little look over here, this is just some of the data I've collected. Students are asked how anxious they feel in a number of different situations, from 1 being not at all anxious to 7 being extremely anxious. And I'm just using this to demonstrate that it's not just social science students who are anxious. On the left here, you can see math students that have collected data on. In fact, we did work with Glasgow University, and even students on elective stats courses have some stats anxiety, which is quite interesting. And the majority of students do expect stats to be difficult, etc. So if you teach stats, you're fully aware of this, as I do. I can't remember if I mentioned, but I do teach compulsory stats modules for math students. That's where my data comes from. So if, like me, you do have to be that first lesson of the first year when they look at you in horror because you're going to teach them their most hated subject from A-level. This is the same with all disciplines. And this type of anxiety, lack of confidence, not wanting to ask for help, all of these things impact on their ability to be able to learn. Now, where stats, maths and stats support comes in is that it is specifically tailored to the individual. They can ask whatever questions they want, just without anyone else around them. We obviously can give them alternative explanations and immediate feedback. So confirmation that they're correct is very positive. So although you can get this in the classroom as well, we've seen in maths and stats support, you can get a very anxious student down to sort of a working level quite quickly. However, no one seems to have got any data on this. So we all know that this happens, that we can reduce anxiety, we can build confidence, even if we just get them in one session only, we can turn around an anxious student. It's getting them in the first place, though, that's sometimes problematic. So this is my most recent data. I literally analysed it at the weekend, which I'll give a longer talk on at some point. So from this feedback, we've got surveys from before they use stat support, straight after their first session, and some end of year data, which I'll try and collect again. Now, in that, students were significantly less anxious asking stat support staff for help compared to lecturers. Of the feedback after the end session or the end of year session, you can see in this bar chart that we asked them if they felt more confident or less confident about the topic they came in with, but we're also interested in whether we've helped them generally. So we also asked them whether they felt more comfortable or more confident generally undertaking statistical analysis. So you can see all of the green represents people who felt more confident after one session. Now, we did something similar for their own perception of their change in anxiety, and we got equally high changes. So after one session, they were feeling less anxious and more confident. We don't have a huge number of paired ones, but we have done an official comparison of their scale mean anxieties before and after their first session. And there's significant reductions in anxiety about software. Choosing the right test is one of the things that students get most anxious and worried about. Once they can choose the right test, they can easily find a resource, but it's actually choosing it in the first place that causes the most anxiety. And another interesting point is that although they came for help in stat support, their anxiety about asking lecturers for help has actually significantly reduced as well. So obviously, if they can then feel more confident asking lecturers for help, they can go back to their own teacher and ask. I think it's that initial asking in the first place, which is problematic. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to a section on what happened during the pandemic with the sort of emergence of online support. So at this point, we're gonna plug this again. Sorry for the plug. If you don't already read MSR Connections or are not aware of it, it's a Maths, Stats and OR teaching journal, sorry. And there was a particular issue on responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is the most recent one. And what I've done is I've taken some information from my own paper and a couple of others that I thought were relevant to this talk. But then you just go to that one place to locate them all in more detail. So as I said before, I do teach statistics. Half my role is that I'm module leader for first year, second year stats. And I'm sure everyone's pretty much the same, that transitioning to teaching modules online was not very pleasant. It took a lot of effort and didn't really work. I kept trying to adapt, but it didn't particularly work very well, particularly tutorials. So we know this as staff that it didn't seem that effective from a teacher's point of view. But last year we surveyed, myself and staff at Glasgow, surveyed students to find out what they thought of learning predominantly online. So this is general stats teaching as opposed to support. So the students at Glasgow, I do have to say, here this is showing you learning statistics effectively. So did they feel they could learn statistics and software effectively online? And here Sheffield Hallam is mostly psychology and some maths. These are on compulsory modules. And you can see there's a bit of a range. Some people felt they could learn effectively, some people didn't. It's kind of even split. Notice how the students at Glasgow felt they could learn more effectively. But as I said, these are on elective modules, not compulsory modules. And research suggests that in order to learn effectively remotely, you do need higher motivation, and that's what ours showed as well. So students who are more motivated to learn, which when you're teaching stats is not very many, are more likely to be able to learn effectively online. We also found that particularly students at Sheffield Hallam, a large number of them, say 30% more or more, even at the end of the year, did not have a suitable study place at home and were having technology issues, which is a major problem if you're going to continue to do online teaching or support. How the students felt negative emotional well-being impacted negatively. Importantly, if they were stats anxious, they were less able to learn effectively. And a very important one was whether they felt they could reach out to staff if struggling, not necessarily asking for help, but knowing that somebody's there did help students learn remotely. Generally, there was a preference to return to on-campus lectures rather than videos, and they felt less able to learn remotely. Now, I'm going to go with this key point of feeling they can reach out to staff, because I think that's where stats support differs slightly from stats teaching. So here, I'm just going to give a quick overview of findings from Gilbert, who surveyed maths and stats support staff in May 2020. So that it's an overview of all centres rather than just mine and Alun's. So generally math support saw a large drop in numbers. And that's mostly because it's much harder to deliver online. So for math support, there'll be a lot of writing out of sort of equations, going through problems often done on paper, which is much harder to transition online. Generally, individual stat support appointments transitioned pretty smoothly. So we just basically had to learn how to use the online systems, which weren't particularly reliable straight away. And it remained very similar. And this is because for stat support, we predominantly provide help with packages. So statistical software. It is harder in that you've got to instruct the student to do something for themselves, which can be very frustrating if the student can't. Trying to describe something you would normally point at is actually very difficult. The worst package for describing is Excel. There's a lot of left a bit, right a bit, no, up, no, don't click. That's on a bad day. That will happen a lot. Institutions that were delivering stats workshops online saw a huge increase in numbers attending online statistics workshops. Drop-in sessions, however, are more difficult to manage. I'm going to hand over to Alan in a second because he did run more drop-in sessions than I did. But basically, because it's just me, it would be almost impossible to run an online drop-in session because you have to sort of monitor who's coming in saying hello, as well as being with that person. So during the first lockdown, I switched to entirely online appointments, bar one online session a week. So online appointments, they replaced campus drop-ins. So the hours I had for drop-ins, I switched to appointments. The weekly online drop-in, this is a really good thing that we started doing that we will keep going forward. The weekly online drop-in, which I will have to leave this for in a minute because it starts at 4, is run with academic skills. So essentially there is a receptionist there from academic skills. I go into one breakout room and members of the library, etc., digital skills, all of those different services have different breakout rooms. And the student gets sent into whichever one is relevant. At large points during the last year or so, stats has dominated consistently the numbers of people coming in for that help. And I do get some help with that. Now, we're transitioning back. I've mostly not transitioned back very much to face-to-face. And that's just because I only get 4 to 6 hours a week support. I have started doing that more so in the last couple of months when it gets busy and we need to have drop-ins. I'll just let Alan speak briefly about the support at Coventry. Alan, you there?
I am. Yeah, thanks, Ellen. So just very briefly, at Coventry, we've continued to offer face-to-face support and online support in parallel all year. And we intend to continue to do so because there's evidence that students or some students either like online support, or for many students, it's actually enables access to support that otherwise wouldn't be there. We're currently using Big Blue Button, as it says there on the bottom of the slide. That's the sort of medium that best works for us because we've tried Teams, Zoom, all the others. None of them have the right facilities for us. And in fact, I think there's an opportunity out there for a budding entrepreneur to develop a suitable tool for running online support services, not just in education, but in doctors, hospitals, all sorts of applications. Okay, Ellen.
Okay, I'll speed up through these because I think we're going to run out of time.
I think
Alan and I were a little optimistic about what we could talk about. So sorry about that. I'll just quickly run through some of the pluses and the pros and cons. So the key things are accessibility. This comes out consistently. Everybody, accessibility and flexibility. So by moving to online, you've stopped the restriction of, say, I'm on campus. We have 2 campuses. So I would have to be at one or the other and a very short space of time, which means not many people can actually access those sessions. Obviously, we've really opened up to anyone doing distance learning courses, part-time courses, people with childcare responsibilities, by having lots of different times that we can move around. And there's no need for me to book anywhere to go if it's online. I think I've already mentioned support is more time consuming with trying to explain something. It is much harder to move between students and with online support, there are always technical issues. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly on to the next ones. So there's a tiny bit of research on what students actually prefer. So Smith reported student preferences for online over on-campus support. But when you look at the sort of breakdown of the qualitative stuff, this is predominantly because students are saying that they don't actually live in the city or they need to commute a long way. So again, it's that convenience thing coming out. I'm the same. When I started doing face-to-face, I was annoyed with myself at how long it was taking out of my day to get all the way down to do 2 hours support to come all the way back home again. Most students are happy to receive support online and happy to use it again. But when I've looked at questioning with what people's preferences are, quite a lot felt the technology didn't really work well. And only 39% will choose online over on campus, again, because of the student use. I'm just going to briefly mention how things are changing. For staff and for students, I think in the first term this year, more people were sort of sticking to the online, the convenience of it, the fact you don't have to waste time coming in and out. What I've seen and what this graph Alan has done of Coventry, the dotted line here is the consultations per hour. And you can see in the last few months, there's been a much bigger increase in the number of students actually coming into centres and going to on campus. And this is where I've also found this, that people are returning to that normal of actually coming in and going somewhere. Okay, Alan's going to go through really fast now, so I think we've got 1 minute. Go on, Alan.
Okay, I'll
hang on, I'll share my screen.
Yeah, am I all right to overrun by a minute or so, Eleanor, or do you want me to?
Yeah, go on then.
Right, let's see how we do. Right, so let me get the right slide. Correct slide. Right, so this is really the part 3, the future. Just bear with me a second. Right, so it's really just to point out a number of documents which, if you've not seen, they're probably worth becoming familiar with. One is a document that came out from the British Academy that looked at the demand for quantitative skills there on the left. The Adrian Smith report, which I'm hoping most people in this room are, or in this virtual room, are familiar with. But then more recently, there's been sort of documents that are beginning to explain what the impact of the so-called Industry 4.0 is. So Industry 4.0 is all about the interconnectivity and the way in which real-time big data is going to change the way in which we do things, and that has implications for us. So there's current economic change. There's increased accountability on the part of institutions, which is a good thing. If you've not seen this particular paper by Croft et al., all the references we'll give at the end, by the way, this is a really good summary of the role that accountability is playing in terms of student support in universities. So I'll skip through those. I'll let you read that in your own time. I thought people might want to see what this slide is, because that's kind of, if you like, our crystal ball. So these are just our guesses, if you like. Something that we're already seeing happening is the emergence of new disciplines. And just as an example, computational social science. So social sciences are having to grapple with the sort of proliferation of data, because there's opportunities there for them to analyze human behavior with data that wasn't otherwise previously available, and that brings new challenges for them. And I think we'll see more disciplines adopting these sorts of approaches in the very near future. I think we're already seeing the emergence of new degrees that are sort of cross or trans-discipline, if you like. Things like data science and healthcare are obvious ones, but things like digital supply networks, smart cities. So these are courses that bring in a whole range of different discipline areas, but they all have that common theme of analyzing data. So data handling skills, coding skills as well, I think it's worth mentioning, are going to become ever more important. So I think that's challenges for us, not just as statistics support staff, but statistics teachers in general. We're going to have to work out where that boundary is in terms of what stat support and what is data science, machine learning, computational modeling. Which bits of all this are we going to teach and support, and which bits do we feel that we aren't best placed to do that? And I think it's important that we all kind of don't bury our head in the sand, and that we embrace those changes, particularly if you're of younger years, unlike myself, because I think there's a need to sort of upskill, especially if we're going to help support students in the future. So I'm going to stop there. There's some plugs which I'll quickly skip by. I'm sorry about the terrible humour, but there's some links there to conferences which you may be interested in. And I will finish there with a slide of resources, references. So there's all the references that we've referred to during the talk. Okay, I'll stop there, Eleanor, and sorry for running over.
Thanks very much, Alan. That's really fascinating to see what's happened from both your perspectives. I've got so many questions, but as you say, we're slightly over time. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? I can see a lot of chat going on about popularity of online student support, which is really, really interesting to see. But do put your hand up. I'll try and... So Mark, you have a question.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not sure if my video is working, but just a quick question about whether you can handle the support, the demand coming from large disciplines, like, for example, psychology, where there's a lot of statistics being done, but the students are often quite very anxious. And so I teach in a psychology department, and we do a lot of support within the department, and there's dozens of staff involved. And I was just wondering if you were getting overwhelmed by students from departments like psychology demanding more than you can handle.
That frequently happens, certainly at Coventry, and the psychology is a very good example, but there are many others. And I think what we try and do is mitigate it by, if we see that happening, for us, the easiest thing to do is to make contact with the relevant module tutors to try and see if there's a more effective and efficient way of doing things. So what we've increasingly done is gone in and done interventions through sort of workshops prior to that sort of demand emerging, if you see what I mean. So we do lots of bespoke workshops. And we do try and work closely with colleagues in different disciplines, because we try and work together so that they're doing what they're doing, and that's brilliant, and it's great to hear what you're doing. I think that's excellent. But all we can do is try and preempt demand, but be reactive as well.
Thanks.
I had an interesting point about psychology as well. I think this is consistent with other people, but I've seen a drop in psychology using the service with it being online. I think that it used to be predominantly psychology students using us, and we were fully advertised in their campus, in their library, and they just came in to see us. And as soon as we went online, I saw a big drop in the numbers of psychology students. We have seen other disciplines come up. I have less of an issue with psychology, because at least the lecturers know what they're talking about. Than supervisors from other disciplines. I've seen more random disciplines where they're just completely wrong about what they want to do, etc. That's more problematic than psychology, I think. But yeah, obviously, because I only have a few hours a week, then I can't advertise myself too well. At times of the year.
Thank you very much, both. I think we're going to have to move on to the next speaker now, but I'm sure there's going to be lots of chat. So if either of you, I know Ellen, you have to go, but Alan, if you're
I'll be here
around, that would be fantastic. So thank you ever so much. That's been fascinating hearing about stat support.